Welcome to the AI Applied Podcast. I'm your host, Connor Grennan.
And I'm your host, Jaden Schaefer. Every week, we break down the latest in AI news, tools, interviews, and discuss how to apply AI into your career and life.
Jaden, today I want to talk about AI and the media. There's been so much cool stuff out there. Well, cool, I guess it depends on whether if you think it's cool, whether you're a journalist or not a journalist. But really, look, there's this Channel One thing, this AI thing. But the thing I wanted to ask you about was something that you've been doing a lot of work on, which I saw and I've seen a lot on, and it's this Axel Springer, which is a name I hadn't heard before, but it's the company that owns Business Insider, Politico, and everything else. And it's this new agreement with OpenAI and Axel Springer. And this is so interesting, right? Because as we know, OpenAI, even the subscription ends in April 2023. When I go out and do consulting for companies, all that kind of stuff, I'm constantly asked by people, yeah, but it only does that. How do they stay up to date? Everything like that. So much to talk about on this, but what are you sort of seeing on this front?
Yeah, no, I think this is really interesting. So the deal is undisclosed. We don't know how much money is getting paid or what kind of the terms of it are. But I think there's precedent. This is, the tech companies do these kind of deals. Famously, you have Google, which pays Apple $1 billion a year to make Google the default browser on iOS. So, and then it's just it'll be interesting to see exactly what it is, but it's going to be something like that. Probably not $1 billion, but they have some sort of annual fee that I'm assuming pay Axel Springer for access to their news. Now, the reason why I think this is really important, and I've talked about this a couple other places before as well, is that Twitter has launched Grok and has up to the minute news included in the model, and it's making OpenAI seem kind of archaic, having a April cutoff of this year. And I mean, and for most of this year, it was a 2021 cutoff. So it's you weren't getting the most up-to-date information. So I think this solves their problem. They make a deal. And of course, they sort of tried to solve the problem in a ghetto-rigged way earlier this year by just doing Browse with Bing, which could just search and grab news articles. But that led to a bunch of lawsuits because it was grabbing news articles that were paywalled and it would unpaywall them. And there's this whole fiasco where they literally had to remove Browse with Bing for 3 months due to this journalist issue and probably the lawsuits coming from it. So I think, this is a no-brainer move for them. They're a big company. They should be paying the licensing for this. And I think it brings them to where they're now they can kind of compete. I think Twitter and Grok are still going to have more up-to-date because they have tweets, which sometimes precede news. But I think this is making them so they can actually play in the same arena. And before, it was kind of if you use AI for anything news related, ChatGPT was just kind of irrelevant, wasn't useful. This should fix that problem to some degree for them.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? And I mean, and I'm finding Bing, the new kind of Browse with Bing works so much better now. So I've moved. I mean, I think we were talking about this, but I don't think I've used Google search in a month. I only use Perplexity now, which is driven by GPT-4 or Claude, or they have their own fine-tuned model as well, which is really cool. But this is the thing, right? With ChatGPT, when I'm asking something up to date, it just goes and grabs it from Bing. But it's usually just one article, so it kind of chooses its own thing, and that's why I prefer something like Perplexity. But it's funny because, again, you and I live in this AI bubble. I think probably, maybe other people live in this AI bubble. And on this AI Applied podcast, it's not just about what you're going to be doing. It's how you're going to teach this to other people. And I talk about that a lot, right? This is not just when I'm kind of out and talking to people, I'm this is not just about you learning. This is about how you are going to share this with your colleagues and friends and everybody else, because that's how we get this out there. But that's the crazy thing, right? Is that if I'm talking to a big group, I'm okay, so who's using ChatGPT? And most people are sort of using it. And then you say, oh, well, who's been using it in the last month? And kind of fewer hands. And then I'm how many people have a subscription? And it's a tiny fraction. People are not using this. So to your point, the Browse with Bing thing is only useful if you have a subscription, and a fraction of the population of humanity has that. And so most people are saying, well, yeah, and I used it back in spring when it came out and all that kind of stuff, but it was hallucinating. And also the cutoff, I asked it about something in 2022 and it didn't know. This just feels table stakes beyond table stakes, right? It just feels like this is absolutely foundational to that. And also, it just rips off that soundbite that all their other competitors can use, right? Which is how Claude was using the soundbite of well, we have a giant context window, and then OpenAI did that, and then Claude's well, we have a bigger one. But point being, when you're talking about Bard or Grok or something like that, and they're yeah, OpenAI is, it's great, but they don't have real time. So I'm just sort of there's that. I totally agree. I think this is table stakes, but then it's also the question of what is the future of journalism here? I know it's a big thing, but I mean, like New York Times, everybody, they're all closing their APIs, right? I mean, like they're not giving away access anymore, right?
Yeah. 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 Everyone's trying to shut it off. Okay. But this is what's so interesting. And this is what I think is the overlooked piece of this story that no one's talking about. Everyone's like, yeah, Axel Springer is like integrating with OpenAI. So OpenAI gets their content built in. Like, yay for OpenAI. Okay. But there's two parts of the deal. The other part of the deal is that Axel Springer said OpenAI is helping them to do journalism, and they're basing, well, so what they said though, which I love it. I love their position on this. They said like, to supercharge our journalists or something like that, or I can't remember what the phrasing was, but it was like, I'm like, oh, that's beautiful branding. Let me break this down for everyone in a simpler form. To replace our journalists, we're using OpenAI. And I know people will be like, think that's controversial or bad or good or whatever. Okay, but pretty much the point is, whether you love it or hate it, a lot of reporting that is done can be replaced by AI. And not that it's like completely replaced. Like you put in the information and you don't need a journalist to assemble the information anymore. OpenAI, ChatGPT, GPT-5, whatever is the future version. Like if you don't like it now, it's going to be able to do there. Like just look at, this is where the direction of the industry is going. You will put the information in, whatever the information and facts you have are, and it will compile the article or the content, that the output. It's not going to be a person compiling that anymore. And I know people like are bothered by this deeply because they're like, it's killing journalism. But like, is it really killing journalism? Because think about it. What is a journalist? Is a journalist the person that writes the words? Is it is a journalist like a creative writing degree, or like like a literary degree or whatever? Or is a journalist the person that uncovers the facts and brings them to the table? Are you a journalist if you go regurgitate what someone else says and you don't do any of your own internal thinking or research or probing? Are you really a journalist? Or is it the person and the people that are like consolidating the facts? And if it's a person consolidating the facts, journalism's not dead, because that's still going to be required in the system, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like these articles that I'm sort of like reading about all this, and especially when you follow the things like the OpenAI, the coup and everything else, like that's not something that just you can generate AI stories on. And this is I totally agree with your point here on this, actually, which is, you're still going to need humans to actually do the research and tell people what's happening. Is it going to greatly reduce probably the number of journalists? Yeah, but here's the interesting thing to me. This is why I keep asking the question in my head: is AI going to kill journalism or save journalism? And I know that's a little bit clickbaity, but it's actually a good question, right? Because journalism was already sort of like before November 2022, or yeah, like journalism was already on the massive decline, right? I mean, there was huge consolidation in media and everything else. So this was going this way anyway, right? It's just like people consume content very differently, all that kind of stuff. But now it's funny, if you read like the the press releases and everything else, the quotes from it wasn't so, I can't remember who it was on the OpenAI side, the president or whatever, but what they're saying is all along the lines of, it's really important that we save this. They're almost talking about it like climate change. Do you know what I mean? Like they're almost talking about like saving Mother Earth. Like it's that kind of language
Mm-hmm.
around, this is really important. We have to do something to save it. And it almost feels like charitable, even though, of course, OpenAI is going to get a lot. Anyway, I'm just wondering if maybe this isn't actually a great kind of like, I don't know. I've heard people say like, oh, it's kind of like deal with the devil. I don't know. This feels like it may actually really be good for both sides. No?
One more point on this. I think that AI is going to save journalism, which was a failing, dying profession. Now I know that's lots of people are gonna complain at me about that, or whatever, be triggered about that. And like, to be honest, at my last company, I worked with the communications department. They were former journalists from top news publications in America. These are some of my good friends, and they did fantastic work. So why do I say that it's a failing, dying profession? Because look at the direction that journalism took for the last 5 or 10 years. Like, think about BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed is my favorite example of everything I hate about journalism. When you have these listicle articles that are like 10 things Kim Kardashian loves to buy in the spring, right? Like, this is not adding value to the world. And I know for the Kim K lovers out there, this will be very triggering. But like, seriously, think about it. And I think this is all evidenced by the fact that BuzzFeed declared bankruptcy. So I think I'm right on this. But like, journalism is an incredible career. It's an incredible job. It's a noble task, you could say, because you're uncovering and bringing facts to the forefront that were not known. But it definitely has taken a slant in recent years where it's clickbait. Journalism has become clickbait. They say whatever's going to get the most clicks because they want the traffic on their website, and they're not uncovering like useful stories. So the reason I think that AI can save journalism is because forget about the clickbait, forget
Right.
about like just compiling content to get clicks. Now the journalists, because they're not just creating the content, they can remove themselves from that and they can focus on investigative journalism, like digging for real stories. Think about how many thousands of stories are out there where there's corruption in companies or in governments or crazy things that are going on and no one's looking at them because they're too busy making these freaking BuzzFeed articles. So if we
Yeah.
can get the AI to do the basic stuff, we get these journalists to do something incredible. That's my
No, okay.
spiel on it.
I actually kind of love this take. Again, I'm always here for Jaden like hot takes like that. And I think that one of the things you're saying here is that like one of the things that this is going to do is it's just kind of make that clear line because again, same thing. Like I talk to journalists all the time. It's sort of like old world paper kind of things, right? And again, they feel forced to write these things because at the New York Times or Washington Post or Miami Herald or whatever it is, like these are companies that need to pay their staff and keep the lights on. And so of course they're going to do clickbaity things because it makes more money and drives more ad revenue and everything like that. But if we can just almost automate that, which Sports Illustrated did to, awful effects that basically blew up Sports Illustrated.
Please tell us about that story a little bit because I seen the headlines, but I didn't dive into it. So tell everyone
This is
what's happening.
wild, right? I mean, this is basically the top brass at Sports Illustrated, like just basically lying about how they're creating content. And look, you could say sort of that something like sports is basically the easiest thing for AI to create. There's really very, very little insight. I mean, like what you see on the field is basically it, right? It doesn't require a lot of analysis. And I think Sports Illustrated thought they would get away with this. And what they were saying is like, oh no, these are all real journalists and all that kind of stuff. It was found out. And now it's literally blowing up the company as if that company could not stand to be blown up. I mean, that company was already on sort of like really, really fragile ground anyway. And the hard thing about it is that Sports Illustrated was sort of known as like the place that actually was the last bastion for actually great articles. Now it's maybe the Athletic over the New York Times, but Sports Illustrated really was that. Do you know what I mean? It was a long form, really thoughtful, like let's go deep into this. Like it was sort of like tracking like LeBron when he was in high school. There's all this great stuff that it did. And for them to go down, I think it's sort of like watching like one of your heroes go down on that. Right. And like that's actually really, I think, problematic. But I think what it points to is this bigger picture of, my gosh, do you actually need any humans like doing sports? Do you know what I mean? Like almost at all, right? Because it's
So
really just color commentary. Yeah.
yeah, if I can jump in on this one, I recently interviewed a couple months ago someone on the AI Chat podcast, which essentially he had a company and he was contracted by some of these like major news organizations like very early on. And before the days of ChatGPT, he's been doing it for a long time, but things have evolved a lot now where it's more into LLMs. But he literally was able to. They would give him all of the analytics from a game because they'd have like
Yeah.
an API. He'd pull that in, and then he would create like an article about it. And he said, and so he'd create like news content for them about it. So like, these companies, like news organizations, have been doing this for a very long time, longer than people even know, because this is like way pre-Chat GPT that he was working. I think it was like ABC News or something really big like that. But in any case, the thing that he said was really cool about it was that he gave them the ability to cover like local games that
Yep.
they were never going to send a reporter to someone's like local high school game, but he could cover all of them and have a news article about all of them, and all the high school athletes think this is so fun that there's like journalism being written about them and stuff. So I think it brings up a good point where like for sports specifically, there's the points scored, there's who scored the points, there's where they scored the points for, there's who's playing, and then like I mean, just like sports commentators are like, oh my gosh, he's like running to the field. He's over here. Did you know, like back in,
Yes.
1995, this other person did this other thing. It's like, yeah, all those like little arbitrary, interesting little factoids, like that's all AI can do all that too.
And
You know what
actually,
I mean?
and look, I just want to double down on that for a second too, because first of all, I love this idea of it's going to, shine a light on local sports because Malcolm Gladwell did this big thing about how local papers survive, and they literally survive just by printing everybody in the town like gets their name like printed in it. You know what I mean? Like so everybody buys it. It's kind of brilliant, right?
Yeah,
Because people
yeah,
just
yeah.
want to see their name. Local sports you can do it actually at no cost. And here's the other thing is that when you hear like interviews with quarterbacks or something like that, it's all just trash. Do you know what I mean? Like it's garbage. It's just it's like, oh well, my teammates, blah blah blah. Like that's stuff that AI can pull up without any problem and create without any problem. So I love this idea that it can actually expand it, and I think that sports is ripe for this. But I don't know. I guess we'll watch this space very closely. But in my mind, it's probably going to save media in ways that we're probably unexpecting.
Yeah, 100%. The last thing I want to bring up here is the fact that a lot of people have been seeing this viral clip on LinkedIn, which is from Channel One News. Channel One News is it created a clip where essentially it was an entire newscast for like 5 or 10 minutes or something, and everything they said was generated by AI, from like the content to the people talking to the clips in the background. Like this whole thing was just like an AI generated news thing, but they said like we're fact checking it, and they said in January they are launching a full AI generated newscast. So crazy,
Jaden,
crazy. It's here.
I have a take on this because I saw that, and I've seen it on everywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter. Like I've seen like the first few seconds, everybody's like, "Isn't this amazing?" So what I did, unbelievably, is I watched the whole 22-minute thing,
Yeah, I didn't.
and I mean, it was okay. I'm just gonna say it. It was painful. It was painful
Okay.
because here's the thing, like. I thought they were going. Well, I guess I didn't know what they were going to do, right? And now it says
Mhm.
right up front, it's like, hey, if anything's AI generated, we're going to let you know because, and we'll have this little thing that dings and says this is AI generated. But it's really weird because it. The reason that disoriented me so much is that you have like these AI generated people talking, and then it goes into something, and you're like, wait, is that AI generated? Because it doesn't actually say like these people are AI
Right.
generated, even though you just assume that the newscasters are. But the really
Uh-huh.
weird thing is that then it goes into a real story, but some of this, I mean, by definition, it's going to be crazy footage, right? Because that's what sells. And I'm like, well, is that real? And I keep looking for the thing. And then they did this thing where it's like a public interest thing, where it's like this little girl driving her Barbie cart down her little road. It was cute. A police car kind of behind. It's like, and she was, little Susie was pulled over. It was just a cute kind of human interest
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But then at the end of that story, it shows like him sort of like pulling her over and giving her a ticket, which looks insanely real. But then there's a little thing. I'm like, wait, so that image is fake, but the one that came right before, which looked totally real, is real. So anyway, my take on this is, okay, we're going to see where this goes, but I found it super disorienting because it goes to the question of authenticity. I'm like, so I don't
Mm.
mind all AI. I'm good with that. But when you're mixing it up and I'm like, well, was that real or what? Or was that like a photo? I don't know. I was confused by it.
Yeah, 100%. I think a really big thing in the future, and a lot of big companies are saying the same thing, so I don't think I'm alone in this, is going to be not that AI is bad, but you have to like define what's AI generated and not. There needs to be like some sort of tag. And like, I think the same way influencers on social media have to do like hashtag sponsored if they're getting
Yeah.
money from a
Yeah.
company, like the disclosure. I think there's going to be the same thing where it's going to be like hashtag AI, where it's like you have to like disclose when something's AI generated because people know this didn't come from the physical world. This came from a bunch of silicone chips. So yeah, anyways, I think that's so interesting. My take is that I think whether we like it or not, whether it's disorienting or not, it's going to be cheaper, so it's going to happen to some degree. Of course, I'm sure all the major cable news networks are going to like keep their top shows on and whatever. And like, listen, is AI going to dominate? Like, no, I don't think it's going to dominate, but I do think that there's like an argument to be made that perhaps AI generated news, theoretically, and of course it could be just as biased as anything else, but could be built to be like an unbiased source. So maybe I want to go listen to AI news because I'm biased, or maybe depending on my political party affiliations, I want to listen to Fox News or CNN and just get the dopamine of having my echo chamber reconfirmed with that sweet, sweet vindication of I knew I was right. You know what I mean? So like people are addicted
Yeah.
to that. So like, who am I to judge and say they're gonna want unbiased news? But I think there's a possibility that there's a news source that just gives you straight facts, and people might be attracted to that. Especially if we move forward a little bit past the uncanny valley, where it's like the newscaster literally looks and sounds real. And of course, it'll say like AI generated or whatever, and then it's like all footage should be real. I don't think we should mix real footage and AI footage. I think that, like you said, is very like you just don't know what's true. So that'll
That's
have
all
to
I'm
just
saying.
keep an
That's
eye
all.
on
It was
things.
it was disorienting. So
Yeah.
I totally agree. I'm curious to see where this goes next.
So it'll be interesting. But hey, for the listener, thank you so much for tuning into the AI Applied podcast and listening to the future of journalism in AI. Make sure to rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Seriously, it means a lot to us. We love those reviews. We read those reviews. We should start reading them on air. Just so
Absolutely. Yeah, we got to
people
tag
get a
people.
shout out when they give us a review. But yeah, seriously, it helps us a ton. It helps other people find the podcast. So we really appreciate it. But thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your week.